approach to find somebody to give a talk on borderline personality disorder and substance use. So I've been working in the area of borderline personality disorder since 1990, so I bring a reasonable amount of experience in that area. But I have never worked in a substance abuse service. But of course, working with people with borderline personality disorder, you know, the figures are really rubbery, but about every second person has a substance abuse problem that's trying to, you know, moderate emotions, that sort of thing. So that's what I'm going to bring. But I may be lacking some details. I was kind of saying to Michael, if anybody wants some precise details, here's your man. We'll kind of go from there. The other thing that I'll just say is that I've recently developed a left eye problem, so I'm only reading with one eye, and it also means that my vision is a bit narrower, wearing multifocals with that. So if I'm talking to here, I'm not going to see people out on the edges. I'm going to encourage you to be rude. Just say, excuse me. There you go, that's really nice. Just talk over the top of me, essentially, if there's something you want to ask. I've also got a slide set here which is going to be available to you anyway, so you don't need to take down notes along the way. And this is my best guess about what might be useful. If you decide something else might be useful, though, ask. So I'm going to respond to questions, because I think questions from the room are going to be more important than my second best guess. So just interrupt me along the way. I'm happy to take off on tangents. Now and again, I have actually managed to bring myself back, but we'll kind of see where we go. So in terms of what I'm going to try and cover here, there's a lot of dot points there, but essentially what I want to be trying to do is look at two things. It's the use of what's referred to as dialectics, and I'll talk about that in a moment, in terms of working with substance use in general, and also about how you work as hard as you can to maintain the therapeutic relationship. So they're the two kind of main themes that I'm bringing with this, and I'll talk about those under those headings. But here are my few caveats around this. So I was making references a moment ago. So I think I know a little bit about borderline personality disorder. I know less about substance use, and I know even less about miracles. And I'm aware that to some degree we're always looking for miracles, and why wouldn't you? But in essence, working with people with borderline personality disorder in terms of what people arrive with is a long-term relationship. It's a longer-term piece of work. In terms of working with people with substance use, that's often repetitive pieces of work. And if we put the two together, then you get a bigger piece of work again. There was some reference being made earlier on, you know, people come with a substance abuse problem to a mental health service, so they'll get flipped over here, and then if you turn up here, you get flipped here. I think that sign catches it at times, this idea of, well, oh, hang on, where should this person be? And it's generally somewhere other than where the signpost is. I guess one of the things, and listening to some of the talks there, so I come from Newcastle, and we set up a service that specialised in borderline personality disorders back in 1998. And we've, I don't know, we've literally treated thousands of people since then. I'm going to be talking about this from a DBT frame, but you would have seen that in 1991 the original DBT research was done and some original research around the conversational model. So we originally chose DBT for a set of reasons that made a lot of sense and still do. Then we added the conversational model as we got some more staff. That took us about a decade to get to that point. And most recently we've added another model which you would have seen reference to, which is group-based schema therapy. So what I'm going to be talking about here, I'm not saying this is the miracle, and it's very much along the lines of, if you think about somebody who has depression, you know, there are tricyclic antidepressants, there are MAOs, there are SSRIs, there are NSRIs. It's about trying to get the right model of therapy fit. Right? Today I'm just going to be focusing more about this from a Dialectical Behaviour Therapy. I'm just going to call it DBT. Patients sometimes refer to it as diabolical bloody therapy, and with good reason. We ask a lot from people we work with, but we also give a lot. I'm going to whiz through some of the stats because I wasn't sure what was going to be put up earlier on this morning. The first thing is I'm just saying, I generally find when I look at stats, they're a bit rubbery. So if we look at the instance of borderline personality disorder, the figures that get quoted seem to range from 2 to a little bit under 6. I tend to talk about 2%. Seems to fit with most of the literature, but there is out there. And in terms of substance use with people who have borderline personality disorder, it ranges from 1/4 to almost 9 in 10. That's a massive discrepancy, and what it does is pick up the variabilities. Now that's an old study, it comes from 2000, but when I was looking around for newer studies to go, are the figures tighter? That was really where I got to, so I'm just kind of recognising that. I want to put in here though a little bit that I've titled Good News. So while I think it is really complex and really difficult for people with borderline personality disorder who also have substance abuse problems, and therefore it's really difficult for people around them, that for 90% of the people who meet that dual diagnosis, when there's been a 10-year follow-up, 90% of them have been drug or substance-free or whatever for at least 2 years. Now, 2 years is long enough to do a long piece of therapy and to really change things. So sometimes it's about how do we hang in there with people to help them get to that point. And in DBT, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, we essentially, our intention is we are going for abstinence from day one, and we're going to accept non-abstinence. And so we talk about shooting for the moon and accepting moonbeams, but we're always going to be trying to work at how do we get closer to the moon. Because in the end, generally if people turn up with a substance abuse problem, whatever that favourite substance of theirs is our problem. And I kind of talk with people going, well, I don't get caught up in what's good or bad, legal or illegal. What I get caught up in is, does it cause, emotional, financial, legal problems? And if it does, then it's a problem. If it doesn't, well, we'll go from there. The other difficulty that comes in here is that the symptoms overlap, and what a lot of you will be aware of is there's a lot of diagnostic confusion in and around the whole area of borderline personality disorder, and if there's substance use in there as well, it just makes it more confusing. And I guess when we go out training, we're trying to get services to do two contradictory things. To go in and diagnose borderline personality disorder earlier, because then we can get treatments in earlier. But the other is don't rush there because stigma is still out and about. And so it's kind of that balance. So when we're coming with people who essentially will meet criteria for dual diagnosis, it is then trying to tease out a little bit with the person what's quite driving what, because they can both have impulsive and self-destructive behaviours, and that can come from too much ice, or it can come from being emotionally dysregulated in response to what's going on in the environment. We'll see the mood swings, so you'll know for people who, for instance, use amphetamines, Suicide Tuesday. So they use across the weekend, and then they have this real dive in mood. Now, is that Suicide Tuesday part of not having had any amphetamines since the weekend, or is it part of borderline personality disorder, or is it more correctly most really a mix in some shape or form? People are described as being manipulative and having deceitful actions, and you'll often see that around people with substance use. They want to keep using whatever their favourite substance is, and so they're going to stretch the truth in various shapes and forms. And there will be some manipulative processing around that. They're often seen as negative terms. I want to try and take the judgments away from those. What I want to try and say is that people are doing the best they can, all things considered, and yes, they might be doing those sorts of behaviours, but if we can remove the negative connotations, so we can just be with people with those behaviours and not get caught up in judgments. Often have a lack of concern for their own health and safety and an insistence on pursuing dangerous behaviours in spite of the risks. One of the things I think about working with people with borderline personality disorder is if I was going to add a 10th criteria, it would be ambivalence. Like nothing, no matter what I do, shit happens. They also bring that approach into therapy, and what they also will often bring is not having their radars working properly. They don't pick risk in the same way that other folk do. So you'll often hear people in the system going, oh look, they just seek out dangerousness. I don't think it's about people with borderline personality disorder seeking out dangerousness, but rather an experience in life as it doesn't seem to matter what I do, so I might as well do whatever it is that I'm doing. And so they do end up actually running riskier lives, but I don't think it's a choice as such for most people. It's not, the system will often be derogatory about it. Whereas I would say, no, the radars just isn't working, and part of our job is to help people develop radars and then to tune them. And obviously when you've got emotion dysregulation and substance use, you put those together, you're going to see a pattern of instability in relationships, jobs, finances. They just tune through them. If I stop for a moment, does anybody want to comment? So my vision is going to be... Yes, please.
Yeah, I just want to agree with that and just say that, with drug use, you've got people who are using street drugs, and you kind of think, oh, these people are street smart. But, I've often marvelled at how naive people are when they're choosing friendships or making decisions about where they're going to live, and the expectations they have of those decisions would sort of, anyone else would go, oh, that's not going to happen, so just wanted to...
It's almost a dialogue, once again, capturing this dialectically. On one level, they're very streetwise. They can do a whole range of things that get in and around certain stuff. And at another level, they're absolutely naive to what can go on. There was somebody else I think who was going to make a comment. Thought I saw another hand. Okay. As I said, please do just stop me. Otherwise, I'll just talk at you. Look, I just put this here, and as I said, my understanding is you're going to be given a set of these slides or links to them or what have you. So that's what I've been led to believe. So what I've put up here is this is just a useful site that you can link through, which is looking at the whole area of borderline personality disorder and substance abuse together. So if you're wanting to chase some more information in general, which is not really what I'm touching on here, because I'm going to be looking at more like treatment approaches, that's a good site to go to. And what you'll notice there is it just said a few approaches seem to show promise. Perhaps the most researched approach is dialectical behaviour therapy, which has been adapted, etc. In essence, in terms of the research, so we heard research being talked about in the main conference room, the research is very slow in this area. So I'm a psychologist, and psychologists get a bit over-identified with CBT, and there are thousands of articles out there on CBT and you can treat this in successions and that in successions and something else in successions, which in many cases is not true. But anyway, that's the research paradigms that are out there about. When it, however, comes to longer-term therapies, and this is what we're talking around with borderline personality disorders, when you're talking about people who need a therapy that is longer-term therapy, then the research is much, much slower. And so what I'm really aware of is that while DBT has been seen as being the gold standard, it's an impure gold. And so this is an area where I think there needs to be an ongoing kind of set of work, but not about trying to find a gold standard. I go back to what I said earlier on. We're running 3 different models where I work, because what we want is a number of standards so we can try and make a fit between the person who has borderline personality disorder and the model that looks like it would work best for them. So it's about trying to be effective in that sense. But that's, as I said, is a useful site to go to. In essence, what we're trying to do in DBT is work with people to get a life worth living. If you just go and target somebody as a set of symptoms and essentially go, we're going to get you to get rid of those symptoms, or you shouldn't do that, that's just a pathway to nowhere. That's not helpful to anybody. Forget about people with borderline personality disorder. If you want to help somebody change a behaviour, you need to help them develop some other behaviours that they can use at those times. So if you want to help me eat less chocolate, and please don't help me do that, I don't like chocolate, but if you wanted to try and help me eat less chocolate, telling me not to eat chocolate isn't going to work. You're going to really need to start looking at it and going, okay, so what sort of problems does chocolate cause or not cause? How much chocolate do you want to have? What other behaviours can we put in, and with a focus on those? So DBT, and we don't know what makes a life worth living for somebody. We're not God in any shape or form. But this is a case of sitting down with people and working out what they would like. So there's this idea in DBT that there's only 2 pieces of leverage in therapy. One is what the client wants, so what are their goals, what are their passions, what are their values, and the therapeutic relationship. And so we work really hard to develop essentially a collaborative way of working. And so this is very much about we two working together to help bring about changes that bring you closer to what it is that you want. Now that makes a lot more sense than going, you've got problems in these areas, because in essence, if you can work with people to get closer to what they want, then the areas that are problems, then there's a value, there's a rationale for why you would start getting rid of those behaviours, be that substance abuse or whatever. But just straight targeting substance makes no sense where I come from. Comments, thoughts? Yes, go ahead.
Isn't that a difficult task when the person living with borderline is so, let's say, unpredictable in their when you ask them what they want? Let's say they say, I'd like to have 3 glasses of beer a day.
Yep.
And you say, fine. And then maybe, what about 2? And then they say, no, you don't understand me, and walk away.
So where I'd be going initially is, okay, so that's one of the things you want to do in life. You want to have 3 glasses of beer a day. But life is more than 3 glasses of beer a day. What's your passion? What gets you excited? What do you want? Now, I've had this discussion, obviously, many, many times with clients, and I've had many different responses. The idea was you would ask people, so what are your goals? But if I was to sit each of you down and say, so what are your goals in life? That's actually a hard question to answer. And I've had many different responses to that. I had one woman I remember who just sat me down and basically said, that's not how I think. And then she described her background. And her background was coming from a situation whereby she was always trying to problem solve how not to be abused. So the idea of having a goal, I want to achieve this in my life, she was saying, that's not how I run my life. My life is how do I maintain safety. Or somebody else who became extremely emotionally distressed when I asked her about that because she didn't know the answer. And her experience of growing up was every time she didn't know the answer, she was told she was a stupid idiot. And so I essentially, without knowing, naively fumbled my way in and said, what would you like? Equally, another person said what they would like is an Impreza RX, WRX. So I'm thinking, you know, in public health, we don't provide those. However, it's a case of, well, what do you need to do to get a WRX? He said, well, I need to get money. What do you need to get money? I need to get a job. What do you need to do to get a job? I need, and this is where the rubber hit the road, I need to learn how to stay in groups without destroying them. So she had tried various pieces of education and she got thrown out along the way. And the reason she got thrown out along the way was she's essentially grew up between two continents. So she had a parent on each, and things would get really difficult, so they'd send them to the other one. And so I had this image of her growing up in the middle of the Indian Ocean. There's an awful lot of water and not much else. And she described the happiest time in her life being in a children's prison in South Africa, where what she said was that she did the equivalent of her HSC there. She had the peace and quiet of being in a cell. She was able to focus. She was very bright. Then you take her, you pop her in a group with people who are noisy. They're saying things that got really difficult. But on that way, that was how we were able to meet her goals. So I wouldn't be just starting, okay, so that's 3 beers in a day. What else would give meaning to life? And that is a hard thing. In terms of doing this, we will do it early on in therapy, but it's a live thing. Because, you know, often people will go, well, I'm not really sure, and I go, I wonder what goals he thinks I should have, which is reasonable, because I'm the one asking it. And so we're modifying them, we're seeing them as being something flexible that gets changed along the way. And that's also going to be true with the substance use. Initially, we're going to have two truths, and this is where the dialectics come in. On one level going, yeah, look, I don't want to drink anymore. Every time I drink, I get pissed, I have fights, I have this, I have that. I really want to drink, because when I drink, that's when I have a really interesting time in life. I find out I'm dull, actually, when I'm not drinking. And so that's where the struggle comes in, and then it's backwards and forwards about how we work with that. Does that help a little bit in terms of our form of madness and working? Yeah, okay. In DBT, we have a hierarchy, and the substance use will get woven into this. But the first thing is we've got to work with people to keep them alive. So that's always going to be our hierarchy. We can't do therapy with dead people. So we're going to address anything that puts life at risk. And that's going to include deliberately self-harming. Now, for people with borderline personality disorder, the self-harming is often a solution. In fact, it's often more of a problem for health professionals than it is for people for whom it's a solution.
Or their mothers.
Yes. It's a solution for the person who doesn't. It's a worry for those around.
It's the hardest thing,
Yeah.
just watching that
Yeah.
and not knowing what to do. And also then being told by a professional that please understand that when your daughter does that, she's not in pain. It's relieving the pain. And that's like enough to send you.
Yeah. Look, it's interesting. Some people will describe that they don't feel the pain. Other people will describe doing it to feel the pain. They have a sense of being kind of numb to the world around them, and the pain makes things real. I mean, what we will be doing is really looking at what is the function of the self-harm. And then the question is, okay, so if that's what the functions are, and this is what you're wanting to do, does this behaviour help you achieve these goals, these passions? And that's where the link is. It's got to go back, because if we just say to somebody, don't self-harm, don't do this, don't do that, we've just joined a queue of people that goes around the corner, essentially invalidating that person's experience of themselves, and that's kind of not going to work. But we give it top priority because basically what the research says is that people who self-harm are at greater risk of going on to kill themselves. So the self-harm may not have the function of death, but it brings in extra risks. And it seems to be, and this is where our systems get it really wrong, So many of you will have heard that expression, delicate wrist-cutting behaviour. So it's just kind of a scratch with the bits of bubbles of blood. And I've heard really derogatory said, oh, it's only delicate wrist-cutting behaviour. They're just manipulative, they're just seeking attention. The reality seems to be, whether it is a delicate wrist-cutting behaviour or something far worse, the risk of going on to kill oneself is about the same. So we target everything the same. We're orientated, because this is a collaborative model of working, the idea is at the end of DBT, the people working with will know what we know. Except they're going to know more, because they actually know more about themselves than we can ever really know. So this is talked through, it's clear, there are no secrets. This is not like, for instance, a psychoanalytic approach where I'm going to, you tell me something, I'm going to say something really intelligent back. I'm going to make an interpretation. It's about working together. So we'll be looking at that. It's really clear that we're targeting that. Marshall Linehan, who developed this model, gave an example of a client who, for months, they would come in, you've self-harmed, right, we're going to do a chain analysis. So a chain analysis is just pulling all the behaviours apart, wondering what could have been done differently, what skills could be woven in. And the patient eventually came in out of frustration and said, look, I know you're not going to let me talk about anything else unless I stop self-harming. So sometimes it's a funny journey that gets people to the point of being able to experience life without it. Certainly I did a follow-up study with a master's student of people who come through our DBT program. One of the pieces of information coming through was that a lot of patients stopped self-harming because they didn't want to see the look of disappointment on their therapist's faces. They didn't want to do the chain analysis. And what that captures is that true nature of the relationship. You know, if somebody comes in, I remember saying to somebody once, they were new in therapy, came into Christmas, we're having a 2-year shutdown. In my mind, though I didn't discuss it with her, and maybe I should have done, was my fear that she'd go back to overdosing over Christmas, because we'd only just started, she'd only just stopped. Christmas was a dreadful time in her family. She came back, indeed, she had started overdosing, and I just said, oh, she was frightened about what I was going to say to her. And I said, look, no, I'm not going to get angry. I'm actually just disappointed that it's happened. She found that really, really difficult to deal with. She'd come from environments where if I got angry, sworn at her, hit her, whatever, that's fine. By saying I was disappointed, and that was what my heartfelt response was to her, there was a care in there. And so it was just a totally different way of being in the world. And so what we're working at with DBT is about that development of a real relationship. It doesn't mean we're inviting, oh God, thank you. I'm way too slow on this. Okay, let me jump through DBT then. Okay, look, just quickly on the hierarchy. So anything that gets in the way of therapy we'll address, and that could include the substance use. Any major things that get in the way of life, and then coming down to the skills. And I've just listed there the main sorts of areas of skills to talk. It's not really part of my talk. This slide is just what are the 5 things that make up good therapy. So in DBT, we're trying to teach people skills, and this comes down to Linehan's failure when she first started. So she came in wanting to extinguish self-harming behaviour, and it was a disaster. And so the toss-up was, do you target the behaviours that aren't working, or do you address the issues that get them there? And in the end, that was why she went for the skills, to help people be able to do things differently while having an individual therapy at the same time. We want whatever we're doing to be able to be generalised into the natural environment. So we provide an on-call phone service. So when Marley was talking, she was talking about ringing the phone. So we provide a phone service from 8 in the morning, 8:30 in the morning, until 10 o'clock at night, 7 days a week, but the service does close for 2 years over Christmas because that's what we're told to do.
2 weeks.
Did I say 2 years? Oh, good. I need a break. Yep.
Nearly there.
Nearly there. 2 weeks.
But isn't that the worst time of year to close that service?
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with that at all. We get directives that come down from the Ministry of Health now about closing of services. It is what it is. One of the things I decided a long time ago, I will do the best I can, all things considered. And that's how you maintain therapeutic optimism, psychotic optimism, when you work in a system that is great in some ways, but flawed in others. And this is just saying how often, so weekly individual therapy, weekly skills work and practice, phone access for skills coaching, plus consultation for the therapist. So one of the things we have learned when we've gone out and trained into other services, when those services fall over, or if services fall over is a better way of putting it, it's often because they don't have a consultation group. Consultation group in DBT world is DBT therapy for the DBT therapists. And if you don't provide support and structure, one of the things that Linehan says is that therapists fall out of therapy as often as clients fall out of therapy if you don't have. So it's about trying to get a whole service wrapped around that is caring for everybody who's involved in the care. Okay, we arrive with some assumptions. Patients are doing the best they can. And then the tension to that is, but they need to do better, try harder. So I've only got a subset of the assumptions here, but I will generally go through with these with people very early on, and I'll actually give them a copy of, because I will come back to this. So in essence, if somebody's gone off to do some homework or they've self-harmed, they'll often come in and they'll replicate whatever systems they've come from. So if their experience has been that people will get angry at them, and if they get angry, that provides a defence, then that's what I'm going to see in some shape or form. And what I can be saying is, no, look, where I come from is you've done the best you can, and I have no problems with that, because we also work with the idea, given all that has gone before, how else can you be other than the way you are at this moment? That's fine. So that's the acceptance. It's a Zen Buddhist aspect that comes into DBT. So you're doing the best you can. Somehow you're going to have to do better, try harder, if we're going to try and get you closer to what a life worth living looks like for you. Patients may not have caused all of their own problems, but they have to solve them. And this kind of addresses the unfairness aspect. It's not fair. I'm happy to see you. It's kind of like, well, yeah, whereas whoever has been part of the process that has got them to here, or whatever process this is, they're off doing whatever they're doing. So that kind of attempts to address the unfairness. The lives of suicidal borderline individuals are unbearable. Not all the time, but at times they're absolutely unbearable. That's why people are looking for exit doors. And you need to learn new behaviours in all relevant circumstances. So dialectics is just about trying to bring two things together. And as I said, in DBT, we're trying to look at going for abstinence, but accepting harm minimisation as an approach. So a non-substance abuse example of that, client I was working with came in one day very early on in therapy and said, my mother's trying to kill me. And I was like, okay, let's try and work this out. What is it that your mother's trying to do that's killing you? She said, well, my mother won't buy me a car. If she doesn't buy me a car, I won't be able to come to therapy. And if I don't come to therapy, I'll kill myself. So that's a view of mother. So I put that over here. That has a truth. So we work with all things have truth in them. So that's a truth. A couple of weeks later, she came in and said, look, my mum's wonderful. She's taken a day off work. My son is sick. He can't go to school. So she's taken it off so I can come here for therapy. So now we have two different views of mum. Dialectically, if we imagine one is black and one is white, when we put them together, we don't get grey. Or we might get a little bit of grey, but we get some black and we get some white. Because there's some truth over here that my mother can't do everything I want her to do to help me. And she'll do the best she can to help me when she can. So it's about bringing those in. So we bring that kind of approach to everything. And so we'll often kind of ask, so what is another way of looking at this? So what we're trying to say is not what you've said is wrong, because it contains truth by definition, the way we work. But are there other ways we can look at this to bring other truths in? And that's what we're trying to do all the time. So that's essentially dialectics. And that's just a picture of Martian Dog. Because the rest of the slides of this come from an article by this pair. So Marcia, in terms of the person who is the main developer of DBT, and Linda, who did the work in and around substance use. And so what she's saying then is that DBT is the simultaneous embrace of acceptance and change in DBT, and that's a little bit similar to the 12-step approach. So God grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change. In DBT, that's called radical acceptance. And one of the things you can't change is your history. So one of the things we're going to be looking at is you have the history that you have. Somehow, at some point, we're going to have to be able to accept that, not get caught in it, not battle it, not go back and go, but I wish it had been different. I mean, that's a reasonable wish, but if you get caught up in that thinking, then you don't actually move on to do something that's different. Now, we don't mean by that we accepted that it was right. That's not what we're saying. But you've got to kind of, imagine if this room was painted purple, you hated purple. You could come in here and go, oh God, I hate purple. What idiots would paint the place purple? Ah, that's a ridiculous. And go on and on and on. Well, you come in and you go, okay, the room's purple and I don't like it. What do I need to do about it? So you can either battle against it or accept that it is purple, and therefore, what do I do from there? then having the courage to change the things I can. Change is extremely hard. If you look at, I mean, in this country we've done really marvellously with smoking. We've gone from about half the adult population smoking now down to it's about 13%. But when people give up smoking, they can give up a physical addiction. That only takes a few weeks. You might be able to give me even down to days, I don't know.
Oh, probably a few weeks, yeah.
But the psychological addiction, the habits, you know, every time they have a cup of coffee, they go to the pub for a drink, you do whatever. Change is really, really hard, even if it's a change that you know is good, even if it's a change that you want. The habits come in at almost a non-thinking level. So we need to make sure we don't underestimate how hard it is for any one of us to change any one thing. And that's where I think this idea, you know, having the courage to change things coming from the 12-step, I think holds an absolute truth in that. And down, the last little bit, once again, coming from the 12-step program, is that we look for, so what else is in here? What else do we know? In terms of the targets then, you're right. So what we're going to be looking at then for people with substance abuse problems is decreasing their abuse. As part of doing that, then we're going to have to help them decrease the discomfort associated with abstinence or withdrawal. So there's going to be some physiological problems initially. Now DBT teaches some skills around self-soothe, and this is about how you look after yourself, how you care for yourself. If you want to go and have a look at the DBT skills, by the way, if you go out and Google Guildford Press and I think Dialectical Behaviour Therapy, you'll get through to the skills training handouts, the actual worksheets. What you will not get is the teaching sheets. So there's a whole range. Just getting sheets is not enough. If just giving people sheets of paper worked, everybody in Australia would have very good mental health. Because over the years I've noticed we've given out more and more pieces of paper. But if you want to go and have a look at some of these skills, they're certainly there. And obviously go out and buy the books. In fact, we encourage clients to come into our system. If they've got the money, please go and buy the manuals. Once again, it's what I'm saying. It's a collaborative approach. It's not like this is secret information. We give people out. We print off quite a bit of that and give it out to people along the way. But you can go and look these up. We're going to do whatever's required to help them decrease the urgings and the cravings and the temptations. And this is true whether it's substance use or self-harm or whatever. You lock me in a hotel room with a bar fridge, with chocolate in it, before the night is out. If it's chocolate in that fridge that I like, it's gone, I can assure you. If it's chocolate I don't like, it's fine, it'll be there the following morning. So, first of all, we need to make sure that whatever it is that people are craving, having urges for use, isn't easily available. So we've got to try and create as big a gap as we possibly can. We're going to also need to look at decreasing risk. So how do you make it harder and harder and harder to get access to the substances? And so there's some suggestions in this slide. We talk about burning bridges. What is it you need to do to burn bridges with that world out there that you've been abusing, whatever? So that is really, really hard. Because generally if people have, for instance, an alcohol problem, they mix with people who drink. And so the moment they don't drink, it's questions. Who do I talk to? Where do I go? What do I do? And so this goes right back to what I was saying at the beginning. To get a change in behaviour, you need to have something else in underneath there as well to support during that process. We'll do that in various shapes and forms. We'll make ourselves much more available to people early on around that. But we're also going to be starting to look at, so, you know, what are some other things you can do? And often it's about looking for things that gave them joy earlier on in life. Because the moment you start abusing a substance, you forego other things. And so I'm working with somebody at present who used to be a dancer. So one of the things we looked at was the idea of her going back and starting to dance again. She actually found that really invalidating. She was just saying, look, I weigh more now because of the medication I'm on. I'm not as good as I used to be. I go along and I just feel really bad about it. So let's reverse back out of that. Seemed like a good idea, but right at this moment it's not. Her dad, though, likes riding bikes. She's wanting to spend some more time with her dad. So she's going to go off to our local university, has a cycle place where they do up bicycles and you can get them quite cheap. And so she's going to go along and get that. And in the interim, she started going to the university too. So she's starting to talk about getting that physical fit feeling that she got as a dancer, but in a different way. So it's about trying to find a way back to things that people value. It's not what we value, it's what the people we're working with value, though we may have some ideas in and around that. We're going to go for total cessation of the drug right from the get-go, as I said, but we're going to accept whatever it is that we get. So what we're doing in terms of that is we'll try, so if I say to Michael, I want you to give up your ice. There's just, this is just too big a problem, mate. You get the strife you get yourself into, and you're going to go, so you want me to give it up for life? And I'm going, yeah. You go, oh God, I couldn't do that. That'd be too hard. And so we come down to whatever is the smallest unit, and it might be at that moment that you're prepared to agree with me you're not going to use it for the next 5 minutes. Fantastic. We'll talk for the next 5 minutes. When that 5 minutes is up, how about the next 5 minutes? That 5 minutes seem to work. So you're going for whatever unit you can get, and then you build it piece by piece. Whereas if you say to somebody, how about you give up your favourite substance till forever? That is really dumb. You might say, look, in terms of the problems it creates, that's where we've got to get to. But let's work about how we get there. So we're going to be going right from the get-go, no use, but we're also going to accept what we get. So that once again, that's how the dialectics play out in this. Okay.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah, please do.
I'm really interested in what you do with someone who is my son-in-law, right? Ice addict for a long time due to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week at work, provided by his boss. They had a great culture going until it all fell apart. You know, didn't know about it.
Yeah.
Now he's unemployed 2 years. He was a self-harmer. But the one thing I want to know is how you can help them regain all the minerals and nutrients that these drugs are taken out of their bodies, and do you support that and help with that?
We will support anything that gets people towards a better quality of health. What I'll say though, as a clinical psychologist, I'm kind of eyebrows up.
Yeah.
So what I'll be wanting to do then is link them in with the GP if they don't have a GP.
Yeah.
We'll be linking them in and asking the GP to do a set of blood so we can determine
Yeah.
where those deficits are so we can start working out what's there.
Yeah.
We're quite happy to work in and around, so what do you need to comply to get those sort of things up and going?
Yes.
But we also need to recognise the limits of our knowledge.
Yeah.
But we will work with people in and around that. I mean, if I think back to the 70s and watch people, watch what speed used to do to people back then, and then I come fast forward a few decades and watch what speed ice does, it's just on another horrible scale again.
Well, it's just worse because of the whole nerve ending damage. So I'm getting him on magnesium and something called MSM, which is methane sulfate methanol. Sounds terrible. It's really good for your body, and a bunch of vitamins, and it's working.
Okay, so you know more than me.
The anxiety's going down.
Yes.
But I'm desperate to find people who understand it and can help in this area, because my theory is that you don't want to use it if you're going to get nothing out of it. So if you get nothing out of it because your body's working better, then your tolerance to it's gone and you can't use it anymore.
So you've just passed Behaviourism 101 in one sentence.
Thank you.
A behaviour will become self-extinguishing if there are no rewards there for it.
Yeah.
If a behaviour continues, then there must be something rewarding. It may not be what you think it is, but you need to go and look for it. This is what we'll do therapeutically. So, I've mentioned me and my love of chocolate. There'll be people who, when they have chocolate, however, get migraines. So you give me chocolate, I'll do again whatever it was I was just doing, because it seems to be working really well. You're feeding me chocolate. Yeah. But for other people, they're going, well, I'm not doing that again because I got a migraine last time. So it's about working out for each individual what it is that reinforces.
That's right. Your love of chocolate might be to do with your need for magnesium, whereas
I think it's just a need for chocolate.
you know, it's full of cocoa's got it in.
Yeah.
Whereas the other person might have too much magnesium.
Okay.
At that point,
I'm going to take 2 minutes, if that's okay, because we've got 10 minutes to change rooms, and I've talked too slowly about the slides up front. As I said, you'll have the slides. No, that's fine. Rather than go to the rest of the slides, I'll run with hands in the room. I think that's the best way.
I just wonder, this might be completely irrelevant, but you know how there's the neural pathways, the reward pathway?
Yes?
Is that in any way linked or? Well, you know, people are getting something out of it, and it's neurologically.
This is out of the substance use or out of
Yeah,
self-harm?
no, or whatever.
I mean, you most probably know the neural stuff on this back to front. I'm not sure if I should talk or whether I should let you talk.
Well, I would think that the neural pathways with people with borderline personality disorder, I mean, if they have addiction and they're getting a reward, as we said earlier, that people will do something they get a reward for. If you've got somebody who's not managing their emotions well and they find that that's a relief, they're going to do a bit more of it. Hence, we see a lot more people. But
It goes to the points in the brain.
That's
That is the short, concise answer. One of the lovely things about psychotherapy, though, and this goes back to Russell Mears working in the conversation model, that other 1991 article, so he's done some research process, is that, and this is totally unrelated on one level, but they were just doing an experiment where they were flashing lights at a level that people could recognise and just mapping the functional neuroanatomy and just the passage of information through the brain. At the end of a year of therapy, that was broader and faster. Actually changed brains through
That
therapy.
was my point, I guess.
Yes.
If it's neurological, can it be changed through therapy, and that's what you
Yes. I love all of that stuff. I don't understand it. But because people just say, don't we just talk to people? Well, yeah, but we talk in a particular way. We're looking, this is the science and the art of psychotherapy about getting change to occur along the way. But for me, it's always had to be a collaborative thing. So when I bumped into DBT, I went, this is fine. It does a few things. I mean, it brings that whole collaboration together. There's a degree of therapeutic sharing that goes on, and I think that's important in terms of modelling. And it has an emphasis on irreverence, a bit of silliness, and you may have noticed I do that. I actually think that sometimes a bit of silliness in therapy just moves it really quickly, certain parts of it. It's like a picture tells 1,000 stories. I'm going to have to wrap this up. I do apologise. I've done what I always do. I'm a very slow learner. I've got more slides here that I can talk to, but I'm hoping that I've really only covered half of what I want to cover, which is that dialectics, about recognising there's a truth in whatever there is and that there are other truths as well, and you need to find all of those to really be working through with somebody to get a full sense of what's going on. If you just kind of go, don't know, as I said, you're a part of the long line of people, well, that's not helpful to anybody. So to some degree, it's about recognising that whatever it is, the self-harm, the substance use, serves a very functional thing in this person's life, and you just can't strip it off, and you've got to work out what it's doing and what are some ways we can work with that person that gets them closer to their goals. And as part of that process, the chances are you're going to help extinguish the stuff that's not working for them. But if you go directly at it, you're not doing the person any favours. That would be, I think, would be my takeaway line.